At first, Millie had not wanted to tell anybody about the black lizards she found in the forest. But when they got sick in the following days, she knew that she needed to get a vet involved to help the animals. But she had never expected this man to have such an extreme reaction to the animals. Millie needed to get away from the creatures immediately. Millie was still completely stunned. The moment she had shown the vet the black lizard she had found, his eyes had gone wide and he jumped back, screaming for Millie and her father to do the same. They obliged out of pure shock, but were not getting any more information out of the vet as he quickly started to make a call and left the room. It was clear that he did not want the father and daughter to overhear this conversation. Millie got scared that this vet was going to take the beloved lizards away. With a reaction like that, there had to be something wrong. She wanted to just grab the terrarium and make a run for it, but her father stopped her. He could understand her emotion, but he was not going to let his daughter go against the advice of the vet. They were going to wait for her and face the music. And not long after, the vet came back into the office to deliver the shocking news. Millie had no idea what exactly she had rescued from the forest, but the vet knew it all too well. He could not believe that these creatures were actually in his office. It should not have even been in the country. This was way above his expertise to handle, and so he had called in the experts who were on the way. And they had a couple of very difficult questions for Millie and her father. But what exactly had Millie taken out of the forest? Were these lizards dangerous to her, and why did the animals shock the vet so much? Millie loved to go exploring in the forest. Ever since she was a little girl, she had been fascinated by nature and mainly by all the creatures that lived in it. And there was no better place to look for all these little miracles than in the woods. But Millie had no idea yet that she was going to find creatures today that she should have never been able to come across. This encounter would change her young life forever. Normally, Millie would go into the forest with her mother, father, or somebody else to supervise her. She was only 9 years old, and who knew what dangers could be hiding between the trees? But today, Millie was actually out and about on her own. Neither one of her parents had time to chaperone her, but Millie wanted nothing more than to go exploring today. Mainly, her father felt horrible about not letting her chase that desire. He had always tried to stimulate his daughter to be in and around nature as much as possible. And deep down, he believed that she was ready to go out on her own. She knew the woods like the back of her hand and had proven to him many times that she was very responsible there. But it was more an issue to convince his wife and Millie mother, Anastasia. She thought the idea of letting a literal child alone in the woods was absolutely ridiculous. Anastasia had always been very protective of her daughter, a lot more than her father Michael. If something were to happen to the girl out there all alone, she would never forgive herself. But somehow, some way, she let herself be convinced by her husband. What probably made the most impact was how badly Millie seemed to want to go to the forest. And Anastasia also realized that she could not keep this child inside forever. But maybe she should have. The forest was fairly close to the house, so Millie could easily walk towards it. She was almost skipping the whole way. She was so happy. She even brought a basket and even some glass jars in which she would collect bugs. She was planning to spend the whole afternoon in the forest, but when she ran into two creatures, that plan quickly changed completely. Suddenly, Millie did not care at all anymore, and the bugs, or beautiful nature. Millie had been exploring for about 2 hours with everything going very smoothly. She had probably a smile from ear to ear every second she was there. She had taken about 1,000 pictures or something and seen many cute animals. But then she suddenly noticed two creatures that were anything but cute, and they stood out like a sore thumb against all the beautiful green of the forest. Millie had never seen something so intensely black before. At first, Millie was afraid to get close to whatever the creatures were. She had never seen them before, and it could be dangerous. Millie knew that the best course of action was to just turn around and walk away, not taking any unnecessary risks. But something inside her stopped Millie from that. Her curiosity was increasing by the second, and she could barely even stop herself from getting closer and closer. She needed to know what those creatures were. But getting closer did not help her identify what those animals were. All that her mind could come up with was that they looked like lizards of some sort. But in all her years walking in this forest, she had not once seen a lizard of any kind here. And that made sense, as this climate was anything but optimal for big lizards to survive. Millie had learned that from her father once, and that instantly made her worried about the animals. Maybe they would not survive for long out here. One of the glass jars that Millie had with her was still empty. Maybe she could catch those lizards in it and take them home. She had no idea how to take care of creatures like this, but she was sure that she could find something on the internet about it. And the animals would probably have more chance of surviving in her care than out of her in a seemingly unnatural habitat for the animals. And so Millie went ahead with her. What would turn out to be a horrible decision to take the lizards home? She put some moss and leaves in the jar that already had some air holes pocked in the lid. Millie then slowly approached the still very still lizards and was getting closer to trapping it in the jar. She was focusing so hard that sweat started to drip off her forehead. Just a couple more inches. Just and little further. And then, in one smooth movement, Lily managed to scoop the lizards off the tree with the glass jar and screw the lid back on it in record time. In the jar, the lizards finally started to move, and they were struggling around in there like their lives depended on it. Millie could feel the jar shaking in her hand, and she quickly put it in her back. Maybe the animals would relax sooner if they were in the dark, and they would think that it's nighttime or something. Millie, of course, did not know that lizards are mostly nocturnal, but that did not really matter. What mattered most was that Millie needed to get those animals home as quickly as possible. On the way home, Millie tried to look online what kind of lizards she had just found. She assumed that there would not be a lot of black lizards and that it would be easy to identify the animals. She had no internet until she finally made her way out of the forest again and then found that there were in fact a lot of black lizards in the world. But no matter how many pictures she scrolled through, she could simply not find any lizard that looked like the two she caught. When she got home, Millie's parents were very relieved to see her. She had been away for a while, and even though that had been the plan, it is never fun for parents to not exactly know where their 9-year-old daughter is for an extended period. They asked Millie how it had been and if she had encountered anything special today. Millie greatly hesitated about telling her parents about the lizards in her backpack. She really wanted their advice, but also knew that they would probably not be happy that she just took unknown animals home. She decided to just keep her parents in the dark about the black lizards for now. It would probably be better if she knew a little bit more about it herself before she would ask for help and advice. She just smiled at her parents and told them that she had a great day, but that she was really tired right now and wanted to relax in her room for a little while. They were very much okay with that, as they had a lot of work to still get done themselves. When Millie closed the door of the bedroom behind her, she immediately took out the jar with the black lizards and put it on her little desk. The creatures had calmed down by now and were just chilling on the bed of leaves that Millie had made in the jar. But even though the animals were doing alright now, Millie knew that that would maybe not last long. She needed food, water, and probably a bigger enclosure for them. And she needed it fast. Luckily, Millie knew that her parents still had an old fish tank stored in the attic, and seeing as her parents were currently very busy downstairs, this was the ideal moment to go and get that tank. When she placed it in her room, Millie snuck out of the house via the window and the roof so that her parents did not see her. She got into the garden to collect moss, leaves, twigs, and everything she could fill the old fish tank up with to make it more like a terrarium. Millie had also looked up what lizards normally ate, and she was very much in luck that they mostly just ate bugs, because she still had all the bugs she collected throughout that day before encountering the black lizards. She felt bad for the poor bugs, but at this point, keeping the lizards alive was just more important to her. At least, until she found out more about it. And when she did, Millie would very much regret putting so much effort into helping the animals. When Millie got back into the house, she quickly finished up the terrarium, put it in a bowl of water, and then went ahead and carefully tried to put the lizards in. She was still afraid to get in contact with the animals as she had no idea if their skin could maybe be poisonous to her. Or worse, they could even bite her. But the transfer was luckily a success. Millie put a couple of life bugs in and then closed the glass box off. Not long after that, the lizards started to look very content. But now she had to decide what her next steps were going to be. She could not just keep these lizards hidden in her room and feed them forever. She needed to think about what exactly she wanted in this situation, and the first thing she wanted was more information. Mostly about if those animals could potentially be dangerous to her. But that was very difficult if she could not find this exact lizard online. But there was a lot of general information and warnings about lizards to be found. And out of all the information Millie could find, two things stuck with her in a very positive way. The first was that lizards would only rarely bite, and most did not even have the kind of teeth that could perforate human skin. Especially now small lizards like the one she found. And the second thing was that the toxicity and danger of a lizard or other amphibian were mostly indicated by their bright color. Seeing as her lizards were as absent of brought color as it could possibly be, Millie felt confident that the animals were not poisonous and thus not dangerous to her. She immediately felt a lot more comfortable about her decision to bring it home and now even dared to pick it up out of the enclosure to play with them. She named the lizard Sirius and Sneap after the beloved Harry Potter characters Sirius Black and Severus Snape. And from that moment on, she really started to connect with the creatures more and more. Days passed without her parents having any idea about Millie's new friend. All they noticed was that she was spending more time in her room than usual. They found this somewhat odd, as Millie always wanted to go outside. But at this point, they did not feel the need to question it yet. They often came into Millie's room and then never saw anything out of the ordinary. They had no idea about the homemade terrarium that she was hiding under her desk. At least, not yet. While the first couple of days went fine for Millie and her lizards, she started to notice some worrying changes after that. The lizards became less and less active, they started to eat less, and Millie even thought that the animals were not drinking anymore. Millie still didn't know much about this kind of animal, but she knew that this could not be good in any way. She was afraid that maybe the environment was still not good enough for the lizards to survive. It would most likely thrive the best in a semi-tropical climate, but Millie had no idea how she would be able to create something even close to similar to that in her bedroom. Online, people were saying that she needed a heat lamp of some sort. New Millie had looked it up online, and they were way too expensive for her to afford the little pocket money she had left. The little girl was now faced with a very difficult decision to make, but she knew that saving the animals should be her highest priority. She was as nervous as could be about it, but Millie knew that she needed to tell her parents about the lizards. She figured that they would probably be angry that she had been keeping this a secret from them for so long, but if they could help her take care of the animals or maybe bring them to a vet for her, it would all be worth it. And so she went into the living room with her knees shaking and the terrarium in her hands. Anastasia was busy in the kitchen when Millie came downstairs and did not immediately see what her daughter was holding. Michael was still at work at the time. She quickly turned the heat down on one of the boiling pots and turned around to face her daughter with a smile. But that smile quickly faded from her face when she saw what Millie was holding in her hand. And that their old fish tank from the attic? The fact that Millie had managed to bring that thing down from the attic was strange in itself, and Anastasia had definitely some questions about that as well. But then she started to notice that there was actually something in the fish tank and that Millie was looking very upset. Anastasia asked her daughter what was wrong, but the more Millie tried to speak, the more she felt the tears well up in her eyes, making her unable to get out a single sensible word. Anastasia quickly took a couple of steps towards her daughter so that she could have a better look at the fish tank Millie was still clenching onto. she saw that there was a lot of moss, tree bark, and even a bowl of water in it. Her daughter seemed to have made a terrarium of some sort. But why? Or for what? Then suddenly something moved inside the tank and Anastasia jumped back and let out a little scream. What had her daughter been keeping in there? Anastasia now had eyes on the creatures that moved inside the tank and took a closer look at the small black lizards. She had never seen anything like this before. Millie was now as nervous as could be. She knew this was a make-or-break moment where she would have to convince her very apprehensive mother that she had done right by taking the creatures home and that they needed to help them now. Anastasia looked at Millie with a very strict expression on her face. "Well, are you going to explain what is going on here?" Millie had to swallow away her nerves, and with a stutter in her voice, she started to explain that she had rescued these poor creatures and that they would have died if she left them behind in the forest. She claimed to have been really careful when handling it, even though she knew that this was not entirely truthful. Millie could see that her mother was having doubts. And she was right. On one hand, Anastasia wanted to be very angry at her daughter. She had drilled into her head that she should never tackle home animals, especially once she did not know, and she had blatantly disobeyed their orders. But on the other hand, Millie's motivation had been nothing but praiseworthy. She had done it to save those poor little animals, and apparently she had been really careful in doing so. As Anastasia was debating on the response she was going to give, the silence was suddenly broken by Michael coming home from work in a very good mood. And when he walked into the room and was in the fish tank with the lizards, he actually got excited. As Michael was a bit of a nature freak, he always loved seeing animals up close, and the fact that he did not know this one only made things more interesting for him. Anastasia knew that it would be very difficult to be strict when her husband was so excited about the find, and so she decided that if there were to be consequences, they would have to come later, when all the commotion had settled down. She told a very relieved Millie this, and then immediately went on to discuss what they were supposed to do now. Millie did not just bring those creatures to their attention for no reason. Millie told her parents that their mystery lizards, Sirius and Severius, were not doing so well. They had started eating and drinking less and were not as active anymore as in the first couple of days she had found them. She was convinced that they were sick or that the environment here was simply not optimal for the animals. They needed to bring Sirius and Severius to a vet and have them checked out before it was too late. But Michael had a different opinion about this. His argument was that the animals had apparently survived in their local environment well enough, as he only started to deteriorate when Millie captured them and put them in a small glass cage. It was not abnormal for a wild animal to get depressed or have less energy when their living space is suddenly drastically slimmed down. Maybe these animals did not need to go to the vet, but back into nature, where they came from. Millie understood that this was also a possibility that she had not yet considered. But there was still that chance that she was right, and the animals did need help. It was clear her parents had no interest in checking it out. If she wanted something to be done, she would need to do it herself. And so she offered her parents something that took them both a bit aback. It was clear that she was very passionate about helping these animals. Millie offered to pay all the vet costs herself if her parents would only bring her. And if the animals were fine, she would release it back into the forest anyway. Michael explained to her that it would probably cost her every penny she had at the very least. And if the lizards needed treatment, she might be paying off the debt for years to come. But Millie did not care. She had her mind made up, and her parents could honestly only have respect for that. While Anastasia was not in favor of letting her daughter waste all her money on something like this, Michael was much more willing to let his daughter chase her ideals, and it did not take him a lot of effort to convince his wife. She could also see that if this was so important to Millie, then it would be a mistake if she were to stand in her way, even if it meant that she would have to spend all her savings on it. Michael called the officer of the vet to see if they could make an appointment to have their rescue lizards checked out that day, and luckily, the vet actually still had a spot for them later that afternoon. He assumed that it would probably only be a small checkup and that he could do it in under 10 minutes. But nothing would turn out to be further from the truth. But the vet would only find that out when he saw the lizards. Millie and Michael still had a couple of hours to kill before they were set to meet the vet, and they spent that time taking a closer look at the black lizards themselves and doing some further research. Michael was actually smart enough to bring out gloves when he handled the lizards, something that Millie should have thought of a lot sooner. But she had to stick-switch her claim that had been very careful. Out of the glass box, the lizards actually started to look a lot better. Michael tried to keep a good hold on the creatures, but they were struggling around a lot, desperately trying to escape. They even got away once, but father and daughter were smart enough to only take the lizards out in their locked-off bathroom, and so the animal had no way to escape out of their reach. But this behaviour was confirming Michael's suspicions a bit, and Millie started to get a bit nervous. If her father was right, then she would indeed be wasting all of her money on getting the vet, while it would be for absolutely nothing. And then she would have to say goodbye to her little friends anyway, as per the agreement with her parents. But it was too late to change her mind now, and so she had to show that she was still confident about her decision. So they quickly put the lizards back in the cage and got ready to leave. The ride to the vet was nerve-wracking for Millie. She could not take her eyes off Sirius and Cerverasus as they were almost spastically jolting through the glass box. They probably had a very difficult time processing why they felt like they were moving when they weren't moving. She knew that their cat also had this problem when they transported him in the car. She just hoped that this whole endeavour would not stress the animals out too much. When they arrived at the vet, Millie and Michael were told that they had to wait a little while to be seen by the vet. He was in the middle of an operation that was taking a bit longer than expected. The pair were totally fine with that, of course, and Millie was even a bit relieved. This meant that Sirius and Severius had a bit of time to calm down before they were presented to the vet. Calm lizards would be much easier to examine than hyperactives. The pair was called into the office about half an hour later by an exhausted-looking vet. It was already past closing time at this point due to the surgery, and Millie was his last customer of the day. He just wanted to get this over with and get home. That much was very clear. But when he got a good look at the lizard, the vet instantly knew that this would not be the case today. His reaction would stay burned on Millie's mind for a long time. The moment the vet put on his glasses to get a better look at the strangely black lizards, Millie saw his eyes go wider almost in an instant of realization. He suddenly seemed full of energy or adrenaline again and jumped back, away from the box. He then screamed at Millie and Michael to step back as quickly as they could. The pair was stunned, but did follow the vet's orders. But they were desperate for an explanation. But before they could ask the vet anything, they were told to wait in the room as the vet quickly picked up the glass box and brought it to the other room. Millie wanted to follow the man, but her father quickly stopped her. He didn't like what was going on here either, but he did realize that this was not something they could fight. They would just have to wait until the vet returned, and then they could ask him for an explanation. Millie and Michael were nervously waiting in the room for about 20 minutes. At that time, they could hear the vet making some calls, and they could hear that his voice sounded almost shaky. Whatever was going on, they knew it would probably not be good. After about 15 minutes of silence, the vet suddenly came back into the room again. But this time, he was without the lizards, which immediately set Millie off. She demanded to know what he had done and where he had taken her little friends. But the vet was not willing to tell her anything before they answered some of his questions. With a lot of effort, Michael managed to calm his daughter down, and they sat down with the vet to help him however they could. Millie told him where she had found the animals, what she had done with the creatures in the time he was with her, and what she had fed them. She even admitted to the vet that she had handled the animals with her bare hands, something that drew not only a headshake from the vet, but also a look of disappointment from her father. Millie had clearly lied to him about being very careful with the animals. If these creatures was poisonous in any way, then who knows in how much danger Millie had possibly put herself in. But the vet quickly put those nerves to rest. The vet was satisfied with the answers Millie had given and actually looked a bit relieved for a change. He told the pair that Millie was not in any danger, as the animals could only be slightly poisonous if they bit you, and that was not the case with Millie. He went on to explain that he had called animal control so that they could pick the black lizards up. They should actually be here any second now. Millie immediately got upset again that her lizards were going to be taken away, but this time the vet could explain that he simply had no other choice. He had recognized the lizards the moment he saw it. Any vet in the area would probably have been able to do that. This is because, about a week ago, a message was sent out to all vet animal shelters or agencies that could possibly encounter lizards to keep an eye out for this particular animal. The vet went on to explain that the lizards were actually a very rare and endangered animal. There were none left in the wild, and only a few were in existence, period. They all lived in special breeding programs with the sole goal of getting the population numbers up again. And Sirius and Severius had actually escaped from one of these particular breeding programs at the university nearby where Millie lived. They were the only two males they had there, so they needed to find the lizards back. But the university had little hope, as it could have been anywhere in the forest after escaping. The fact that Millie found it and then decided to capture the lizards was like a 1-in-a-million chance miracle. Millie and Michael could not believe what they were hearing, but suddenly they had no problem anymore with handing the lizards over. It was clear that Sirius and Severius had a much greater purpose than to be a pet, or be out in nature. They were tasked with saving an entire species, and Millie was fully responsible for making that possible again. And she was also rewarded as such. The university promised to pay for her first 2 years of education there if it would ever come to that, and of course, she did not have to pay a penny of her savings to the vet.